What's up, guys? This is Mike Casu, and you're listening to the Brute Strength Podcast. This week, I interviewed head gymnastics coach of Brute, Dr. Nick Sorrel, the Gymnastics Doctor. This might be the best podcast yet if you're into CrossFit. Nick is a doctor. He owns a gym. He works tirelessly analyzing videos for Brute athletes, as well as he has a wife and kids. So he talks about how he prioritizes his work, how he stays as productive as possible in his life. So that alone is very valuable information. The best stuff is obviously once he starts talking about gymnastics. This guy is literally, in my opinion, the best gymnastics coach in this sport. The system that he has created for Brute is absolutely amazing, and we see results faster and in a safer and time-efficient way than I've ever seen. We give you links to the first level of our progression, as well as lots of other good information on muscle ups, handstand push-ups, and kind of a different way to think about your gymnastics progression in general. Hope you enjoy the show. The Gymnastics Dr. Nick Sorrel. How are you?
Hey, good. That's just getting right to
it. When did you start calling yourself the Gymnastics Doctor?
You have to ask Jeff Whitmer that. Jeff Whitmer coined that phrase, and I was reluctant to take it on because I thought it was a little douchey, and then it just
at least a little douchey. I love it.
At least, yeah. We might go right past a little douchey, right to extremely douchey.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. I guess I just kind of gave in, just like. I guess, like Jeff Whitmer and his dating life, eventually you just got to give in.
I hope you're listening to this, Jeff.
Yeah, me too.
Oh, shit, man. So you're an ear, nose, and throat doctor. You're a surgeon, right?
Yes. Yeah,
okay.
That's my day hustle.
Okay. So my first question, you've got that and being a surgeon is usually thought of as one of the busiest jobs possible, right? The longest work hours, etc. You own a CrossFit gym. You're the head gymnastics coach at Brute, and you work with hundreds of athletes. And if that's not enough, you have a wife and a baby.
Yeah, 6-month-old. Yeah.
So what does the structure of your day look like for you to be able to do all of this?
That's a good question, and I do manage a lot of stuff, and part of it's just my personality and I get it from my dad that I've always got to be doing something, and I'm never content to just like be sitting around. And my wife and I talk about this, and it's a little bit of a blessing and a curse at the same time. I wish I could be a little bit more content and at ease and just to sit and be, but. To me, I derive my purpose and my day-to-day, drive and sense of well-being is from always doing something. But and so I do all this stuff. And again, I talk with my wife about this a lot. When I say my prayers for things and I meditate on things about what I want to be better at, it's actually more structure and more discipline. Because I feel like I get a lot done just because I can't stand to sit still. And we joke about like one of the things I like to do in the morning, and I think it's because in residency, 5 years of training to be an ear, nose, and throat doctor, where all you did was work all the time. I never had a chance to eat breakfast, right? And I was always eating a cup of cereal in my car with one, driving my car with my knee on the steering wheel, and so whenever I finished, I love to. So now one of my things that I love to do in the morning is sit there and eat breakfast and just veg out in front of the TV and just watch a show and just, whatever. But it'll take me about, 2 hours to watch a 30-minute episode of TV because I'm always distracted and doing something. And I'll be like, oh, I got to do this. And I get on. So basically, that was a long way of answering your question, is that I get all that done just because in my brain I can't turn my brain off and I've always got to be doing something.
Mm-hmm.
I would probably get more done if I was able to organize it and live with a little more discipline and structure it better, which is one thing, like now that I have a baby, that I'm having to be more intentional about, because now there's just not enough hours in the day. And I've contacted my congressman about getting more hours put in the day, but I haven't heard anything back yet. Maybe it's because it's election season and they're not, I don't, so now
put something about abortion. Put something about abortion in the in the subject line.
I'm staying away from that one. But anyway, so that's it, man. I just a typical day for me is wake up. If I have surgery in the morning, I go to surgery about 7 o'clock. Then I go to the office from 9 to 4 or 5. In the middle of the day, I try to get some stuff done in terms of programming for my box and answering questions for the Brute athletes in the middle of the day. Then I try to go and exercise as much as I can, although that hasn't, whenever I have to give something up these days, it's typically my own personal exercise. And then I'm, coming home, getting the baby, my wife, and then that's the hard part is trying to separate that personal time, because I need my wife and my baby to have my attention and stuff like that. And in these days when your work is so portable with smartphones and stuff like that. And I think I saw you post about it one time and like about, trying to have dedicated time to do that. And other times when you just put it down, and that's something that I need to work on. So.
Do you have any rules for yourself that you set, like say, no phone after a certain time, or like when I'm with my wife, anything like that?
Dude, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. I don't have any rules, but I really need it. Like now, at this point, what I try to do, and I'll try to just leave my phone in the other room for a while, and I'll try to have like blocks of time that I'll do it. Like, okay, over lunch, what I'll do is I'll sit on my phone and I'll answer Brute Facebook messages and stuff like that over lunch, and then I'll say, okay, I get home with the baby and my wife and everything like that. And then the baby, now fortunately we got her going to bed at like 7:30, so we got a little bit of time, and I'll try to do a little bit of that stuff and then spend time with my wife, and then I'll put it down, and then maybe a little bit before going to bed. But lately I find that I was like kind of overstimulating myself before I go to bed, and I wouldn't sleep as well. So now what I'm trying to do is just before bedtime, I'll like just be like reading and for like personal mental growth and development and stuff like that, reading the Bible, reading whatever else, and so that's working out a little bit better for me, because as much as I think I have it all together, man, all these things, they can weigh on you, all these responsibilities, even though it's things I like to do, it's things I like to do, but at some point, if you're never resting, I think it can weigh on you, physically and emotionally,
Absolutely. So that leads into my next question, and it might just be that you have a screw loose and you're just fucking crazy workhorse. But do you have any ways? You've mentioned, your prayer and meditation. Any other ways that you prevent becoming overworked or burning out?
That's a good question. I mean, I think what it all really comes down to is, in the end, your sense of well-being, knowing that you're pursuing a purpose, and that's, and I've talked about this before. Try to think about the idea of mentoring a lot, with the, my nephews and people that are coming up, because I was fortunate in having some very good mentors and family members that I could watch growing up and seeing how they behaved and what it took to be successful and happy in life. And ultimately, and I've talked with my wife about this before, and I mean, this be a little bit off the subject, but like if you take my father, who's like one of the best people I've ever met, and you ask me, Nick, what are the top 10 things that you look at and you're proud of your father for? And although he was like absolutely wonderful to me, he loves me to death and he'd do anything for me. If I had to pick those top things, probably only a couple of them would have been the things that he directly did to me. And most of the things that I'm really proud of him for are the things that I see with the way he interacts with the world, the way he treats other people, the way he treats his life, and like basically working hard and being selfless and things like that. And so to me, what I try to think about is on a day-to-day basis that life's more than about like just you're, in search of the dopamine and serotonin of the moment, of just being happy in the moment, and just, and that's a lot. And, we think about that when we're younger, and whenever I was in, college and things like, and young in my 20s, and you're very idealistic, and don't get me, idealism's great, but, you think about everything's about all these experiences and all these things and collecting. And I was like, okay, I want to just be able to look back and collect all these moments and things that I can look back and I say that I did. And I think as you get older, or as I got older, I started to think of it less as collecting experiences, but more as collecting accomplishments and living towards the purpose of being a good person and living with certain values, And so, like with my daughter, she gets all of my attention, and she's the most, her and my wife are the most important thing in the world. But at the same time, I know I want her to be proud of the things that I'm doing and say, wow, my daddy accomplished that. He takes the extra time, even if it meant that he wasn't as happy because that one particular day, because he wasn't as well rested, or because even if he spent a little less time with me, he knew it was important to, take care of that person. As a physician, I took the time to take care of somebody, or I took the time to make sure that whatever job I was doing wasn't half-ass.
It might not be that you're not as happy that day, but maybe you're just a little uncomfortable that day.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, exactly. Because I think it comes down to semantics, but it comes down to your whims, like what makes you happy in the moment versus your overall sense of passion and purpose and what really drives you.
Right.
Because things change from day to day. I mean, think of the things that you were into whenever, you thought we all thought we knew everything when we were, in high school age.
25, Nick. I know everything, okay?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Oh, dude, I knew everything when I was no, but like even and the things you're into, but that's what it's all about. It's all about growth, and you think of and we all know kind of the people that are stuck in the same goals and aspirations and the things that made them tick as back whenever they were in their late teens, and you're like, and it's a little bit sad, I mean, because we all grow and evolve over time, and so anyway, so I guess that's the long answer to that question is
I absolutely love it.
I avoid getting burned out is by looking at the goal and the end of the road rather than the day-to-day moment,
Right. And without saying it, it sounds like you just enjoy the hell out of that process of working hard, of being a good person. Like it's not really work to you. That's just how you live, right?
Right. Yeah. And don't get me wrong. So I'm not, and I do want to throw in the asterisk that I'm not Superman. There are times when, I tell you what, because like when I was in residency, I remember, and so, when you're a medical resident, you finish medical school, you're a doctor, but then you're just somebody's bitch for 5 years, and, and you just work, 80 hours a week, and you just don't sleep. And I remember just walking around and thinking, and then I started really thinking about like the words and how we use the word happy. And then like what does it mean to be happy and be joyful? Because I just don't feel any of that. I don't feel happy. I just like, it just like sucks, and then you have things, and I was able to do events and see my family and dating my wife, and that was all great. But it's like, man, like what am I doing to myself? Right. But I knew at the end of the road that I could envision where I was headed, and so yeah. So don't get me wrong. There are times, and even today, there are times where at the end of the day, I don't feel quote unquote happy. Right. But and there's a good quote from and if you read Mere Christianity with C.S. Lewis, where he says, faith isn't about blindly accepting just things, just saying, oh, I'm just going to forego my reason to accept something because somebody told me. Faith is about when your emotions don't match up with what your reason is. And I think it's really brilliant, because there are all times when we feel bad and we feel this and we feel that, and our emotions can lie to us, and they can, and if you chase your emotions, I think it can lead you down some dangerous roads sometimes. Absolutely. or some wayward roads. And because what you have to do is in those times you have to tell yourself, no matter how I feel right now, I know this to not be true. I'm anxious, I feel depressed, I don't feel happy, but I know that my emotions are lying to me right now, because I know, and a long time ago, I told myself this is what I want. And so if I keep on going towards that, that's where at the end of the day, or at the end of my life, that's where my true joy and happiness comes from.
I love that, man. I absolutely love it. Okay, moving into some
we are going to talk
gymnastics, man.
Yeah.
Let's do that. That was some good shit, though. I really, really appreciate that. So I met you in 2014, I believe it was. I was living in Louisiana, working at LSU. Matt,
14?
I don't know. When was it? 13?
I think it might have been 13.
Okay,
yeah,
2013. I don't know. Who knows?
Yeah, whatever.
Yeah, I think it was 2013, right after the games that year. Me and Matt had started Bruce Barbell. We're coaching some athletes. We did a free seminar in Baton Rouge, and I look over, and this guy, I could tell he was a fucking doctor, just by the way he held himself. No, but seriously, I look over, and there's a guy teaching muscle ups way better than I could or possibly had ever seen up to that point. And that guy was you. And that's where, immediately I think I emailed you a couple days later asking if you wanted to, do some work with Bruce Barbell at the time. And so we became a Crossfitter, a weightlifter, and a gymnast at that point. What was that early experience like for you, like becoming a part of the team?
Yeah, man, that was really awesome. I really look back at that and thinking of just like, God loves me. I was in the right place at the right time, because it was, I'll give a shout out to Nicholas Mulbear, if he happens to be listening to this. The guy I met at Old Glory CrossFit, and he calls me and he said, "Hey man, there's this guy I know, Mike Caziu, and he won the games." And I was like, "Who?" He's like, "With Hacksback, And I was like, "Hacksback?" And and it sounds like I didn't even know who that was. Because I was this guy who did CrossFit, but I was kind of into it. I knew who Rich Froning was and stuff like that, but I was I didn't know all this stuff. And then I kind of Googled, and then I saw how truly famous and Mike Caziu was.
Yeah, right.
I can't believe it. It's I didn't know who Michael Jordan was or something like that. But
oh my God,
but no, and then. So, and that's back when, I'd gone to regionals in 2012 just because, I showed up and I was like, "Oh, you guys exercise?" And then I happened to be good at gymnastics. And then there was a lot of gymnastics that year in the open, and I made it there. And then I showed up at regionals and I was like, these guys are strong. What the hell? You want me to lift what? And I was 20th in the region that year. And then I got my ass handed to me at regional. But it was fun. And everybody jokes at me because I'm everybody else is, everybody's got all this gear on. They've got knee sleeves, and they've got on all these fancy lifting shoes, and they got their their thumbs taped up. And I show up, I was in straight up tennis shoes and soccer shorts, and I was like, "Hey, you guys work out here too?" I was like, it's out of my league. So anyway, so that just is where my head was at. Whenever I signed up with you guys, I was trying to get back to and Nick told me about you guys, and I was like, all right, I want to sign up with them. This guys, they can know how to get me to the games or get me back to regionals and whatever. And so I was really excited about that. And so I was working out with y'all, and man, it just got to the point where at that point, I was out of residency. I was working a lot, trying to build my ENT practice. And it just got to be where, and exercising enough to keep up with the people to get to regionals was just such a burden. It was just really hard. And so to me, the awesome thing was finding this other way to fulfill this passion I had for fitness without having the burden of just because at that point working out was becoming a chore. It wasn't fun anymore, and although the program was awesome, you guys got me a lot stronger. I was actually close to making it back to regionals if it wasn't for that stupid deadlift workout. But but anyway, so that was basically in a nutshell, the early experience for me was about, all right, this is awesome. I love the fitness stuff. And I have a way to continue that passion for the foreseeable future through the avenue of coaching, rather than having to, my body's getting beat down and I don't have the time to work out enough and fit that into my schedule, so, because the coaching thing, the coaching thing is nice because I can fit that in and like I can bring my computer and analyze videos and make myself a better coach and fit that into, you know, throughout my day, rather than having to take these hour long blocks of time to exercise and recover and stuff like that. I'm not saying I'm not going back to games. I'll be back there, and when I turn 40, maybe.
Right.
Definitely. Yeah, maybe. No, it's not gonna happen.
When we first got together, at the time, our gymnastics program, like Bruce Barbell Gymnastics program, looked like, you know, I threw in some stuff that we had done as a team, like hollow holds and rocks, tap swings, headstands, ice cream makers, you know, which is still. That alone is still a lot more than most of the programs out there. And of course some gymnastics EMOMs, had to throw in some EMOMs. What did you come in and do initially? What was like your first goal when you came on?
So I remember you told me, you said, Nick, I want some progressions. We need to have progressions, you know, and then so I made this long document, and I called it the the Bruce Barbell Gymnastics Manifesto, and it just had all this stuff. And, you know, I based it on some observations, that CrossFitters didn't worry about body awareness. CrossFitters, they didn't, think about what was going on in the middle of the range of motion and think about form. They didn't work holds enough and positions enough. And so basically I incorporated all that, but what I did was I organized it by like the common CrossFit moves, like, progression to a toe bar, progression to a butterfly pull up, progression to a bar muscle up, to a ring muscle up, and all this kind of stuff. And it seemed like it worked pretty good, and then basically once we did that with Bruce Barbell, this was all a learning process. We just started throwing those things into people, like, okay, we'll throw this in here, this in there, this in there. And that's kind of where we got started now, and I don't know if you have a follow-up question, but that, like, now we're a little bit more sophisticated with brute strength, but yeah, that's how we got started with Bruce Barbell, was just making those progressions towards the, with these exercises, like you said, hollow holds, ring support holds, things like that progress towards these major movements.
So what was the issue with that you saw that led you to create the current system? Just take me through the process. And of course, I know most of this, but just tell everybody how you came up with what we do now.
So what I became frustrated with was, and although, we have some great athletes, who did awesome at all these different things just because they're so talented, but at the same time, like, if we asked them to do something different, they weren't learning and or like they couldn't transfer that to new tasks and ready for this, like what they talk about, the unknown and unknowable.
Like what specifically? Give us some examples. Like
if I asked somebody to do, like, say a front roll on rings, which is essentially just the same thing as a muscle up, and, or if I asked them to do a free handstand push up, which honestly doesn't take a lot more strength than, it just takes a little more balance than a wall handstand push up, and, just like simply swinging on the rings and swinging on the, they could do a muscle up, but they couldn't actually swing on the rings properly. They couldn't swing on the bar properly, so just took a step back and said, well, like, why, but for me, a lot of these movements, and I looked at myself, okay, so a lot of these things, like what we call a bar muscle up and a swinging ring muscle up, which is like sort of a front uprise, but not really. Like, I had to teach myself how to do that, and it taught myself very quickly. And I was like, why was I able to do that? I'm no better athlete than anybody else. And then came up with this idea that, well, it's because I have this foundation, or gymnasts have this foundation in gymnastics where they know the basic skills. And so the analogy I like to use is, I think we were teaching people how to build a birdhouse. We were giving them a blueprint for a birdhouse, like, hey, this is how you do a muscle up. But if we taught them to be a carpenter, then they could build whatever they wanted, right? So we, rather than just show them how to do and progress towards each individual skill, we would build their foundation broadly. And so and then if they could do that, then they could teach themselves how to do things. They're much more coachable. They recognize different body positions, and they learn things faster, and they're ready for things that are unknown because they have a broader foundation. And And so then the problem is, okay, so I started doing this whenever I was a little kid. How do I make 20 and 30-year-old people go back and start and train as if they were, had a foundation in gymnastics or learn that? Basically we just said, all right, well, let's just make them do just like young gymnasts do. And we'll have them graduate through a system of levels where they can't advance past the basic skills before they master them. Like, for instance, I always use this example. No CrossFit gym in the country would let you do a squat snatch before you could do a proper air squat. But everybody lets you go to the wall and slam your, all of your weight onto your cervical spine doing a handstand push-up even before they demonstrate a proper headstand. That's balls crazy. You should be able to demonstrate a proper headstand. So our athletes in their level system have to demonstrate a proper headstand before they move on to the next level, which has handstands and then eventually handstand push-ups. And then the question is, okay, so what do we put in the different levels? Because we have to recognize that we're teaching people to do CrossFit gymnastics and fitness gymnastics, which is different than artistic gymnastics, which is like the gymnastics you see on TV. So what I did was I looked at all those testable skills like I talked about before, like bar muscle up and handstand push-up, total bar, everything that CrossFit tested. And I asked myself, what are the attributes that it takes to be able to achieve those things? And then I came up with this idea that like a machine, you needed, 3 parts of the machine. You needed the strength, which is like the motor. And then you needed the gears to make it run properly, which is the skill aspect, and then you needed the fuel to fuel it, which is the endurance. And then we take away the endurance because with us, Chris Henshaw and the CrossFit and people, and Adrian and Jake and you've got all that. That y'all are teaching people how to do that. So where gymnastics lies, where I focus is on the motor and the gears, on the skill and the strength, and then. So the strength, we broke it up into core strength, pushing strength, and pulling strength. And then for the skill, we broke it up into mobility, dynamic movement, and positions. So positions being able to recognize things like hollow, pike, ring support, handstand, and basically you just pick any way your body could be facing, whether it be supine, prone, stand upright or invert, and then whether you're hanging on something or whether you're supporting on something, whether your arms are bent or straight, and all these different positions are defined positions in gymnastics. And then dynamic, meaning you can go between those positions efficiently. And if you can do that, that's pretty much all the movements. And then all you need is the strength to back that up and get you through those. And so we designed it so that each level has the equal portion of those movements, so that even if you're stuck on one level for a long time, you're still getting well-rounded training because you're working all of the different attributes that we see that you need to be a well-rounded gymnast or to be well-rounded in body weight movements and succeed in fitness gymnastics.
You define what it takes to build a successful progression, and there are 4 characteristics, and you say it's logical, linear, personalized, and incorporable. Can you explain each one of those for me?
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah. So, logical, meaning it has to progress from, what is known to be easier to what's known to be harder. Okay. And now that's inherently subjective, but you could very rationally say, okay, a headstand is easier than a handstand push-up, and a ring support and a bottom of the dip hold comes before a ring muscle up. Example I always use is, it's really funny. People always tell me, man, I can get up into the muscle up and then I just fall once I get there. The people that look like Bambi on ice with their arms swinging everywhere, then they fall out of the bottom of the dip, and then you ask them to just slowly lower themselves into the bottom of the dip, and then they can't do it. And it's like, well, how do you expect to fling your whole body weight up there and catch yourself if you can't do it? So that being stable on that support obviously comes before doing a muscle up. And then, so that's the logical. And then the linear is you can't skip steps. Okay. Now we have an asterisk by that one, and we can get to that in a second, but because we're in CrossFit, so if this was just straight up gymnastics, we would want it to be pretty much completely linear. But in CrossFit, we can't very well tell somebody, okay, you can't work muscle ups until you get through level 10 of gymnastics, it just doesn't work because they want to compete and they want to do well. So we throw in, so that's why we have some built-in skill days and things like that to work them. But that doesn't take away from the integrity of the level system. In the level system, we don't skip steps. Okay, you have to go linearly from the easiest to hardest. We don't go 1, 2, 8, 10. We go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then personalized, meaning some people are going to go faster than others. It's that simple. Some people learn this stuff a lot faster, and then that's why rather than just giving people everybody the same random exercises, we have one system, and we're going to build on that, and we have more systems built within that, but this one foundational system, everybody works through at their own pace. We've had former D1 gymnasts that took them, we recommend 3 weeks per level, that, took 3 weeks per level all the way to level 10. So 30 weeks to get to a muscle up. And then we have some people that take some 5, 6, 7 weeks per level. And honestly, I was expecting people to lose their minds about that. I was expecting people to not be humble and to just be like, I'm a CrossFitter, I want to do it. But man, I tell you what, the culture of our brute athletes is amazing. Like, these people are really humble. They really want to do things the right way. And and they're reaping the benefits of it. I hear people tell me all the time, like somebody was just telling me today, or a couple of days ago, that they were glad they were stuck on, and I forget what it was. They were, because we were talking about the jump to hollow on the muscle ups, and they were like, I'm glad I've been stuck on whatever it was, level 6 forever, because they do those all the time in level 6.
Right.
And so that's the personalized. And then incorporable means I can't put, an hour of gymnastics work a day. Because, again, we're teaching CrossFitters. We're not teaching people to be artistic gymnasts. And so we have to have it so that people can easily incorporate it without taking away the broader training goals, which includes, lifting, strength, and endurance and stuff like that. And so the way that we get around that is our level system, and our little sessions last, around 10 to 15 minutes, and people can put them in where they see fit in their training program.
Yeah, I was talking to Henshaw yesterday, and then something he's huge on is that efficient use of time and creating adaptation as quickly as possible. And he uses the example that people don't want filler miles. He says a lot of coaches throw in filler miles and add volume because they don't. They haven't personalized it, and they don't really know what they're doing. So they just add volume. So what we're doing with this gymnastics program is we are giving them, like the fastest way possible to improve on these things and to take the least amount of time per day.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And then we have our, and then it was your idea actually. And then that's why you're the CrossFit guy, and Mike, at some point Mike said, and I mentioned it earlier, we need to have skill days, and so at least one day a week, we have a day where people just spend 30 minutes on other skills, challenging themselves, doing some of the higher level skills that they don't get in the level system. If they're not at kipping handstand push-ups yet, they work them on that day, and then they work their muscle ups and things like that. And they were also using, and like you said, I've talked about this before, it's not always about the exact exercise you do. Whenever I first started this, I would look and I would see somebody post something. I'm like, man, why am I not doing that exercise? Why am I not doing that? But then, you really, and I think that's where people get into trouble as coaches, is they say, oh, you got to do this and you got to add that and you got to add this. And really, it's not about what specific exercise you're doing, and it's about why are you doing it. Are you doing that exercise for a defined purpose? I could think of 100 different ways for you to work on pulling strength, right? But are you working on pulling strength in a way that is appropriate for your level, and are you working at it in a time frame and a time domain that's appropriate and intensity that's appropriate? And then we can pick whatever exercise we want, and then you just adjust things to make people not stagnate and a little bit. And the other, and then we also, I forgot to talk about this earlier, but we define the different types of pulling. Pulling like a lever, pulling like with bent arm, and then bent arm pulling. That's two different types of pulling. So which one are you choosing? Why are we doing that? Are you, a lot of people that have trouble with bar muscle ups, they can't pull themselves inverted. And then I'll tell them, look, if you want to have the strength of your lats to pull down, you need to be able to jump on a bar and pull yourself inverted with relatively straight legs. And that's where you want to be. So if you're going to pick a pulling exercise, that's why we're picking that one for this particular person.
And one thing, I'm not sure if you really mentioned this much, but the entire reason of this whole program obviously is to make people or give them the ability to do more muscle ups, pull ups, handstand push ups, and walk faster and further on their hands, right? Mm-hmm. So if we're not doing that, then we're really not doing our jobs. Right. But there's a million different ways that we can, help people improve those things. And honestly, there might even be faster ways of, say, getting someone their first muscle up, right? Or their second muscle up. But we want to basically raise people's ceilings as high as possible, and by creating a better foundation, we're seeing people able to do 15, 20 plus muscle ups and do them perfectly, so that in the middle of a workout, whatever the gymnastics component is for that workout, it's taking as little energy as possible. That's what we're hearing with our athletes.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I totally agree with a couple of those things. One thing is, like, when I do these gymnastics clinics, I've seen these clinics where people's like, who wants to do their first muscle up? Yay. And I don't geek out about people getting their first muscle ups, on my clinic, because to me, if I could teach you to get a muscle up, like right there that day, it's like, it kind of takes away from my job a little bit, because my job is to teach you, if it was that easy, I wouldn't have to spend this much time on doing what I do, and really believing in building your foundation and teaching you to do things the right way. Like I went in on a Saturday with all of my athletes at my gym, and we just worked on bar muscle ups, and I probably could have gotten a couple of them to just weasel their way up there, but I didn't do it. I said, look, we're going to learn it the right way, and so I taught them to do it the right way, and then what inevitably happens with me is I teach people this, and then I never see it. They always send me video like 2 weeks later, like, look at this, and then they look great, and I'm like, I always miss it, but you're right, we really have to evaluate, and that was, I think, the big I'd say anxiety, but the big apprehension I had about doing things the way we did. It's like, okay, I think this is the right way to do it, but I don't know for sure. Are we really making people better CrossFitters? And then, fortunately, anecdotally, and from personal experience that we're seeing with our athletes, we really have been. They're feeling more efficient, and we're making people more adaptable. We can do I like to teach our athletes to do muscle ups several different ways, depending on what your body is. If your abs are hurting, if your arms are hurting, and you can adapt and do these things with as little energy as possible. And our athletes really have, corroborated that. They've told us that they're feeling better, they're feeling more efficient. The gymnastics takes, less energy, and I've seen, and because that's the way I feel whenever I do it, and I want them to feel that way too. Like I rest on toes to bars, and I got, I've been, like, for a guy who doesn't really work out, I'm doing pretty good in the open, just because it's been, fortunately, pretty gymnastics heavy, and relatively good for what I deserve, because it's gymnastics heavy, and like one of the things like the bar muscles and toes to bar, I can rest, and it's not because I'm special or I'm super fit. It's just because I had a gymnastics background, and fortunately was able to figure out some ways to do these more efficiently, and that's what I want for our athletes too.
Right. We're seeing our elite athletes improve for sure. I mean, Brooke, the work that you've done with Brooke over the past couple of years has been amazing. But what's really the most impressive to me is our the bulk of our clients, the other 99% of our clients that are making just enormous strides because of a lot of this foundational stuff. It's really like this stuff, a lot of it doesn't take away from their other work. Right. It's not as taxing as doing, max sets of muscle ups and handstand push-ups once or twice a week. So it just works a lot better over time.
Yeah, it's something as simple as, like, I mentioned this earlier, but like body awareness, CrossFitters are notorious for having no idea what their bodies are doing in space. And, if you don't know what your body was doing, if you don't know if your legs were apart, if you were hollow, if you were arched, then how are you going to know what worked and what didn't, And by having our athletes focus on body positions and focus on being knowing what their bodies are doing in space, we're teaching them that it doesn't matter. It's not a cookie cutter. We're not saying you have to do this one way. But we're saying if you learn what your body's doing in space, you're going to know what feels better for you the next time when you recreate it, and if you practice, in fact, I was just looking at, I just posted a thing of Brooke doing some 18-pound weight vest muscle ups, and she looked really good doing them. And the thing is she can do really pretty muscle ups with her legs together and straight, and they look beautiful. But whenever she was doing those 18-pound ones, and a lot of times when she's doing them in a workout, she goes and her knees bend and then they come apart. But it works for her because the mechanics of the move don't break down. Her legs just come apart and they're a little bent, so it doesn't look as quote unquote gymnastic. But a lot of people, unfortunately, whenever their mechanics break down, it breaks down to inefficient movement. Mm-hmm. And her movement didn't break down to inefficient movement. It just broke down to movement that didn't look quite as pretty. But it doesn't matter. In CrossFit, it doesn't matter. So if you practice good form, regressing to a little bit, your form not looking as pretty is easy. But if all you practice is bad form, then you usually regress to less efficient, and good form is virtually impossible.
Mm-hmm. How important is the flexibility component to CrossFit gymnastics?
Yeah, the adage I usually say in my old gymnastics coach used to say this is the more flexible you are, the less strong you have to be. Mm-hmm. And I think it's really true. The more, and a joint is only a muscle is only as good as the joint it can move. And it's interesting, because we got this whole, Sean Pastuch is. Am I saying his last name right? Is it Pastuch?
Yes. Pastuch, yeah. I think.
Pastuch.
Yeah.
Oh, that sounds stronger. Yeah. Yeah. Sean and
Jeremy.
Who's that? Jeremy. Yeah. So they're awesome. And they they really have that stuff down with from basically physical therapy and muscle imbalance and that standpoint. That's just way out of my wheelhouse. And that stuff is super important. And actually, I think a lot of that has to do with some of the reasons why some people have a lot of trouble with this gymnastic movements. But from my standpoint, in training, thinking like a gymnast, it's really about just straight up mobility, and it's about being able to move more at a joint and doing stretches that one way I like to look at it is your ability to move a joint is not limiting the work you can do. Mm-hmm. So if I'm trying to do a move on the bar where I swing forward and then I straddle my legs around the bar. Of course, we're not doing a lot in that in CrossFit, but is my inability to move my hips and my my hip joints and my bend at my waist and my thighs limiting that. So I want to be flexible enough to not limit what my muscles can do.
Mm-hmm. I got a couple more questions for you, and then we'll wrap it up. What are the biggest problems you see in CrossFitters when they're inverted? Handstand push-ups, walking. What are the biggest mistakes they're making?
Oh, that's good. All right, so there's a couple of different things. With handstand push-ups specifically, I'm really geeking out on this idea of something that's called scapulohumeral rhythm. And I think, and basically, for me as an ear, nose, and throat surgeon, there's a nerve called the spinal accessory nerve that goes through your neck, and if we injure it, it goes and it innervates your trapezius, and then you can't elevate your arm as well. And the reason you can't elevate your arm is because your scapula is limited in rotation, because there's 4 major muscles that elevate that rotate your scapula, and your trapezius is one of them. So all that means in layman's terms is that you have to rotate your shoulder blade in order for your arm to go above 30 degrees and then above 90 over your head. And that takes certain muscles in your back and your arms. And so I have this idea that, because we all know the person that can strict press 200, plus pounds, but they can do 2 strict handstand push-ups, and it doesn't make any sense. Why is this person so strong they can't do handstand push-ups? And I think a lot of it has to do with activation and coordination of rotating the scapula up as you're pressing with your humerus. So meaning, another analogy would be, you can have a guy that's way stronger than Drew, pick a quarterback, Drew Brees, because at the same time, pick Drew Brees, way stronger than him, but Drew Brees can throw the football, 20 more yards than him, and it's not because it's a muscle thing, it's because it's a coordination thing. And so that's one thing that I think about with the intricacies of pressing overhead, is I try to make people and work on exercises for them to activate their back and rotate their shoulder blades. And, and I have a few little drills that I do with that. One thing that goes along with that is, This another thing is center of gravity. So, one thing, and I'll just say, when I first started, I remember you would send me videos of people doing handstand push-ups and like, oh, this person can do handstand push-ups. And then I would text you back, oh, that's because they're not hollow. They got to stay hollow. And that was me. And now I've had to learn as a coach, like, no, man, you're just thinking like a gymnast. Don't think like a gymnast. It's not always about form. It's only about form in as much as it helps you. Right. So if you're hollow when you're doing a handstand push-up, your center of gravity is in front of your hands. And that's like trying to do a strict press, with a barbell. That's trying to do like an overhead press, and they teach you to bring your chin back so you can push it and the weight stays above your base of support, which is your feet. So if you brought the weight in front of your chin and all the way around, it's much more difficult because you're putting the weight in front of your base of support. So the same thing with a handstand push-up. If your body stays hollow, where your belly button is behind your hand, so it's not over your base of support, and you have a harder time pressing. So if you arch your back a little bit, put your center of gravity over your hands, you can press way better. And I found that anecdotally, and it just makes sense from a physics standpoint. So those are the kind of things that we're looking at with people with handstand push-ups and pressing. Like, are you positioning your body in a proper way to succeed? And the other things are like time.
Let's highlight this. You're saying that you might not have to be hollow for the entirety of a handstand push-up.
No, exactly. Like, look at if you look at Camille LeBlanc Bazinet, I remember so one of our athletes, Mark Stewart, sent me a video, and it was 2 years ago, or was it last year, that they had the strict hand. Yeah, they had the strict handstand push-ups in the open, right? I mean, in the regionals.
Yeah.
And so he sent
that
me
was
video.
2 years ago.
Yeah. Well, and so Camille was doing them, and she had this, and she's under a lot of fatigue, and she would go from this hollow to this big arch in her back when she would press. And he's like, is she doing some kind of kipping strict ones? And I looked at it, and then that's when I really started like analyzing like what, and then I started making myself do it. And the reality is, if you use, so you're sitting there and you're in a headstand, right? And if you use your back to push off of the wall, okay, rather than your arms, because your arms are tired, if you use your back and your butt to push off of the wall to get your center of gravity over your arms, then you're ready to push. That's the equivalent of when you're ready to do the press, bringing your chin back first, and then you're in a position to press. And it's so, and the more I watch these really successful athletes at this in the games and stuff, and the more I do it that way, the more it's just like, that's one thing that I've learned in the last couple of years, that it makes you a lot more successful. And again, that's not quote unquote gymnastic. It's not, gymnastics form, but it's good for CrossFit. Another thing with handstand push-ups is time under tension, so a lot of people come down really slow, and rightfully so, because, you're a grown ass person. You don't want to break your neck. But if you're more comfortable in a headstand, and we spend a lot of time being comfortable in a headstand, you're going to be able to come down faster, and you got to think about when you first were learning how to squat, you would go down to the squat really slow because you weren't sure where you were going to end up. But then once you get better at that, being in the bottom of the squat position, now you just drop straight down into it because you know what that's going to feel like, and so we spend a lot of time with our athletes trying to decrease their time under tension. Now if I was a gymnast and I was doing handstand push-ups, I have no time work domain, so coming down slow for a slow eccentric will make me stronger, and that might be what I want to do. But if I'm a CrossFitter, I'm not thinking about that. Maybe I'll do some tempo reps in training, but the reality is, whenever I'm doing a workout, I want to be going up and down and be under tension as I want to do that as fast as possible. So I decrease my eccentric load. Now for walking, the biggest thing we see is people not pressing out, not pressing out in their shoulders and being loose. So the analogy I always use is, if you had to race 50 yards balancing something on your fingers, how you're a kid and you balance the baseball bat on your fingers, would you rather race and walk forward, balancing that with a baseball bat, or would you rather do that with a noodle? Like one of those pool noodles, something that's loose. And that's an analogy my old gymnastics coach used to give me. And it's true. I mean, your body, if it's loose, is unpredictable in its response to gravity. That means you're constantly having to rebalance yourself. And if you're rigid, you can be rigid arched or rigid hollowed, but as long as you're pressed out through your shoulders and your body is tight, you're going to walk much more efficiently.
Unpredictable in its response to gravity, folks. From Dr. Nick Sorrel.
Yeah.
I love it, dude.
Put that on the shirt.
Fucking gold. All right, man. We're gonna wrap it up. Next time, we'll talk more about pull-ups, muscle-ups, that kind of thing. Guys, we're gonna link in the show notes. We're gonna link for you level 1 of our gymnastics program. So go ahead, click on that, download that, and get started on level 1 of 20 on the Brute Gymnastics progression. If you haven't already, also go ahead and sign up for our newsletter. I'm kind of jumping the gun. Nick, what's your Instagram handle? Where can people find you?
Nick Sorrel, just Nicksorrel.
And Nick has one of the most like educational gymnastics handles on the Insta web.
Super nerdy, man. Yeah. Super nerdy. My followers embrace the nerd, which I love.
Yes, they do.
They love it.
Yeah, you'll get they're like full blog posts under every video.
Full on. Nerd levels 11, man. It's full on.
Yeah. Cool, man.
So I didn't give you. We filled up almost an hour, and I didn't have to give you one gumbo recipe, man. So it was pretty good.
Well, we may or may not link a gumbo recipe in the show notes.
Yeah,
all right, man. This is going to be very, very useful for people. Appreciate it.
All right. Hope you guys like it, man. Good talking, Mike.
Later, buddy.
Later.